My notes. Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome to another ZingTrain webinar. I'm going to give folks just a couple of moments as we start to filter in. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. All right. Hi, everyone. Really happy to have you all here in the room together today to join us for this hour. Today's webinar is going to be all about practical steps to going open book. I am Katie Alexander. I'm ZingTrain's community builder, and I will be your host for today's webinar. And I'm here alongside Joanie Hales, who is one of our trainers. She's someone who has been working in open book businesses for almost 21 years and helping other businesses implement open book management for the last decade. So we are in great hands. We also have Jenny Yim, another trainer here at ZingTrain, behind the scenes, monitoring the chat and questions with me. Thank you so much, Jenny. We are all coming to you from Ann Arbor, Michigan, right here at ZingTrain. And we always love knowing where other people are tuning in from. And it's great for all of you in the room to see if you have some neighbors. So if you want to put in the chat where you are located today or always, we'd love to hear. That's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So before we dive into the content, I have 3 helpful tips to help everyone out and make the most of our time together. So the first, Joanie will be sharing the practical steps first, and then we're going to leave time at the end for questions and answer. We're going to be collecting questions throughout the conversation. Feel free to submit them in the Q&A feature of Zoom, which is a button along the bottom of your screen. We are going to do our best to get to as many questions as we can, but if we're not able to, then we will send a follow-up email and additional resources as we have them to help answer some questions that may go unanswered. There's also closed captioning available. Again, another button along the bottom of the screen. And if you would like to turn it on, Jenny will also drop details in the chat. Last is that we are recording this conversation, you may have seen, and that's because we're going to send out the recording and the slides in a follow-up email. And it will also live on our website, zingtrain.com, alongside lots of other free resources that we have up there, including past webinars. So that's all for me. I'm going to turn it over to Joanie, and I'll see you again for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And thank you, everyone, for saying hello into the chat. There's a wide variety of folks. I feel very international. So thank you all for tuning in from all over the place and seeing some familiar names. It's really exciting to see all of that. So as Katie said, my name is Joanie. I'm one of the trainers at ZingTrain. I have worked in our organization for a little over 20 years. This summer will mark 21 years. I want to say that I just very clearly remember my first introduction to Zingerman's being an open book business. Well, I will also say, I love that Katie shared that I have 21 years in open book businesses. Technically, it's like 1 because it's Zingerman's. I've spent over half of my life working here, but I remember my first introduction to it. I was part of the opening crew of the Roadhouse, so one of our restaurants. As a frontline server, I was invited to this thing I'd been hearing about, this thing called a huddle, but I had no idea what it was. And I thought, hey, they're going to pay me and they're going to feed me. Like, this sounds fun. I'll go to this meeting. So I went to it, and the managers were there. The owner was there. I was looking at this board that had a lot of numbers on it. It did not make sense to me, certainly at first. But about halfway through the meeting, we started talking about our tip out policy. And as a server, what we tipped out, that was something that I was really passionate about and I had some opinions about. And there was a call for a committee to be formed to look at it and come up with a proposal for what we could do differently. And someone said, hey, we should really have a server on the committee. And someone said, well, Joanie, would you want to help out with this? And I sat there very quietly thinking, well, there must be another Joanie in the room. It's not that common of a name. And why would anybody be asking me for my opinion? But then I slowly realized, oh, they were looking at me and waiting for me to respond. And I will say, just before that day, I would have told you that I didn't have enough experience. I wasn't old enough. My voice wasn't as important as others to work on something as what I considered as important as a tip out policy. There just felt like there was no way that I was qualified to sit on a group of people with managers and the owner. But what I learned over time is that is what Open Book does. It opens up a space for everyone in the organization, no matter their age, their tenure, their experience. It makes the table to give everyone a seat at. And when everyone has a seat at the table, I think everyone's getting their voice in the room. So when other organizations are interested in going open book, when they want to hear more about it, when we get to share the steps that we know can help get open book going off the ground, we're just really thrilled at the chance to do so. So I'm glad that all of you are here to learn more. What I think you're going to take away from this webinar is you'll learn a little bit about Zingerman's history with how we went open book and where we learned it from. You're going to learn some of our key elements of the approach to it and the steps that we suggest to take to get it going in your business. To cover all of the ins and outs of being open book, it takes days. We have a 2-day seminar that is devoted to this. So we have an hour together. We're not going to go too in depth on some of the concepts, but we will certainly share at the end where you can get more information. And there will be, of course, be time for questions as well. So starting with a little Zingerman's history. I don't think this will be a shock to any of you. You know Zingerman's as an organization. We opened as a deli on March 15th, 1982. So we just celebrated 42 years in business last month. When we opened, when Ari and Paul, our two co-founders, when they opened the deli was not an open book business. I would say maybe as far from it as possible. So Ari and Paul, they opened a business with the dream of having a Reuben sandwich so large that it took 2 hands to hold it. And they dreamed of a business that could be sustainable, that they would employ a lot of people, but they didn't always know the ins and outs of how to make that happen. In those early days, I think the finances were handled like a lot of startups. If you've ever been in a startup before, you know that the owners, yes, they're the owners, but they're also the prep cooks, they're the dishwashers, they're the janitors. They operated as the chief financial officers. They were the accountants, essentially, without a lot of accounting experience. Paul once described his accounting skills as feeling good when the accounts payable stack got lower. And they used to use the rafters in the basement as a great place to deposit the cash receipts at the end of the night. It took some cash getting stolen from those rafters for them to even open up their first bank account. The first financial person that they hired at the deli was a bookkeeper who had a degree in chemistry that was good at numbers. It was only 10 years in that they finally hired their first full-time accountant. Now, 42 years later, we're a community of 11 businesses, all in the Ann Arbor area. We have an entire team of accountants and accounting assistants who help manage our finances. They help manage the organization. The 700 plus employees that we have at Zingerman's, they also keep an eye on the finances and our key numbers because we're open book. How we learned about it, or kind of our journey with open book, it began in the mid to late 90s. So as I said, we opened in 1982. So it was 10, 15 years later. Things were a little more stable in the organization, and Ari and Paul were looking for new tools that would help keep us growing. And they came across the Great Game of Business. Some of you may have heard Great Game of Business, or shorthand GGOB, they will call themselves. But the Great Game of Business, it shared the story of how the company International Harvester, they were on the brink of bankruptcy. And by turning the finances and the numbers into more of a game where the entire team, the entire staff could play this game, they would understand the rules of the game, they were able to turn things around. They're now, and still are, a thriving business. So the idea of this game that could be played, Ari and Paul, they were immediately intrigued. They wanted to learn more. They, along with ZingTrain's founder, Maggie Bayless, they went to Springfield, Missouri to one of the Great Game of Business seminars, and they came back wanting to implement Open Book for Zingerman's with a few adaptations to make it work for us. I may say this again, but if I don't, one of my favorite things about the Great Game of Business or being Open Book is that it's very adaptable. You can make it work for you. You tweak it to fit in with your culture or what's already working well. I don't know many businesses that do it exactly the same. And I would say that's even true for Zingerman's. How ZingTrain does Open Book can be different than how the deli does, than how the bakehouse does. There's, of course, core tenets to it, but there's those few little adaptations that I think make it unique and make it fit even more so. So Great Game of Business, great resource. Ari, Maggie, and Paul, they also used Joe Knight's book, Financial Intelligence. That really helped us build some common language around finance and numbers, because not everybody has an accounting degree. Not everyone needs to, but I think it is important to still speak the same language. So that book really helped. John Case's book is a great resource that tells different stories of Open Book and different companies. So I share these three resources because, one, they were very helpful for us. Two, they really helped us shape our approach. If these resources did not exist, I don't know what Zingerman's Open Book management would look like. So we always want to give credit to them because they were super helpful in our process. Diving a little more into Open Book itself, want to start with just defining what it is. I think it's fairly common for people to think that Open Book management means that you open the books and you let people read them, or that basically Open Book equals transparency. And I suppose I just want to dispel that pretty quickly. Open Book does not just equal transparency. I think opening the books is part of this process, but without training and without coaching on what those numbers mean when you open them, I think a spreadsheet can feel like just a jumble, or it can look like a foreign language because not everybody knows how to read it. So what Open Book does mean, or at least what it means to us, is Open Book is a system that we use to run the business. And that it's about management, or more about kind of the management of the business than it is just about sharing financials. And we think of Open Book management as being as much cultural as it is financial. Yes, the finances are key, but the numbers go beyond that in so many different ways. We also think it's about getting everyone on the same team. We're all working together to run the business. We're all playing this game of business together, and that it's about looking to the future and what future actions can we take? How do we help the team and the business succeed, working together? And if you are already thinking like, this sounds like a lot of numbers, or it does sound like it'll be a lot of math, or if you are a number phobe where you don't like numbers, some people can get a little like, ooh, I don't know if I want to go down that path. I just want to say, if you don't like numbers, I think those are the folks who actually like Open Book management the most. Because when you change the conversation to not just be about the number itself, but about the story behind the number, or how you use the number to manage the business, I think non-numbers people, they grab onto this very tightly, right? The numbers speak to them in a different way. And hopefully you're already thinking, this sounds great. The team's all running the business, we're playing together, everyone participates. That's certainly the mindset we want folks to have around this concept. But you might also be thinking, how do we get this started? Because it's a process. I won't try to hide. It certainly is a process. But this is what we suggest. These are the steps that we recommend folks taking to launch Open Book. And of course, there are subsets within all of these and different things that you could do. But this is the basic kind of framework to it. I might also add like a step 0, or at least something before that first one, because step 0 is learning more about Open Book in general. So deciding if you want to be an Open Book business, learn the ins and outs, speak more of the language. You can learn more about Open Book. You can certainly attend ZingTrain's 2-day seminars. We do a virtual training on it. You could visit the Great Game of Business. They have a lot of resources on there. ZingTrain has a blog series or blog posts or other webinars too. But step 0 in this process is you've decided, yes, we're going to be Open Book. Then you work your way through these 8 steps. And that's how we'll spend the rest of our webinar together. So starting with step 1, anytime we introduce something new to our organization, we have a system we follow called bottom line change. If you've been around Zingerman's, you may have heard this before, but it is the process we use to manage change in the organization. Certainly introducing open book management, that is a big change. So we would use this process. The first step of the process is to come up with compelling reasons about why something is a good idea. If we can have those compelling reasons, that's how we're going to convince other people to get on board as well. And I think people, especially folks in high functioning organizations, which I believe Zingerman's is, my guess is all of you are in high functioning organizations. When we're asking people to make a change in their behavior, we need to tell them the why. Because they're asking, why are we doing this? What is the point of this? And when we can get really clear about why we think it's a good idea, we can use those compelling reasons to help get other people on board and try to win over any resistance that people may have to the change. So thinking of going open book as a change, these are some of our compelling reasons as to why we think it's a good idea. First is that it's in alignment with our values. We're an organization that values learning and sharing information. We want to give everyone a really great experience working here, shopping here. We think open book really helps us do this. Second, we think that it creates a more effective distribution of stress. And when you think of this, or who typically stresses out the most about the business, it's usually the CEO, the COO, the leadership team, certainly the accountants can be. And when they're stressed, it usually stresses everyone else out, but they don't know why. Why are they so stressed? And people can feed off of it. I think open book helps distribute the stress about the right things. And I'm not saying we're trying to stress out everyone we work with, but if everyone knows that maybe this month isn't going the way we want to, we can all be working together to try to turn that around. So it effectively distributes the stress, so everybody can take a little bit of it, and then we can work forward or work to make improvements. With that in mind, I think what it also does is it breaks down the traditional barriers that I think usually exist in an organization. And I think that is a way to help build commitment. I already mentioned, I think open book gives everyone a seat at the table. Everyone gets a chance to see how their job will impact the bottom lines that we have. And when people can see the direct relation to the work they do to some of those key numbers, I think the commitment certainly comes on a little stronger. We have also found that it begins to teach people to think like an owner before they're actually in an ownership role or before they're in a leadership role. I think having a full picture helps develop leaders even when they're frontline or even when they're starting out. So when they are promoted to a leadership role, they already have all that background. And then I think one of my favorite reasons for being open book is I think it helps us make better decisions. And if you think about it, I think we all want everybody to be making better decisions. When we have that big picture, I think you have a bigger picture to make a different decision, or you're thinking a bigger mind rather than just focused on one thing. When the group has all of the same information, I think we are making different decisions, and that leads to us getting to better results. You can then use coming up with these compelling reasons or use the compelling reasons to help with the second step of this process, which is to write a vision of success. So second part of the bottom line change process and the second step to getting open book going is create a vision of success. Also, if you've been around Zingerman's, you know we're big fans of visioning. We write visions for the organization as a whole. You can write a vision for yourself for the future, for a product, an idea, for going open book. A vision is a way to get people to see the same picture that you're seeing in your head about what it looks like when something is happening, when it's going really well. The more exact definition of a vision is that it's a picture of what success looks like at a particular point in time in the future. And it's described with enough richness of detail that we're going to know when we've arrived. And the descriptive nature of the vision, that is what I think people can grab onto. They can start to see it. They can really envision what the future will be. And it's not a bullet pointed list of goals, but a narrative that will really capture the senses. We define effective visions as being inspiring and strategically sound, meaning that you read it and you get excited about the possibilities, but you also feel like it's attainable. That's where the strategic soundness, we have a chance of making this happen. There's a healthy tension between the inspiring and the strategically sound. And an effective vision is always going to be documented and communicated. When we document it, we can hold ourselves accountable to it. We can refer back to it. We document it so that way we can share it out with other people. To give you a sense of what an inspiring vision for open book management success could look like, here is a small snippet from a company we worked with a couple years ago. They wrote a vision for a year in the future of what they thought or what they wanted open book to be like. And they wrote this before they ever held their first huddle, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. But this is what they said they wanted their huddles and open book management to feel like. You can read it, but I'll read it too. If you even don't want to read it and just listen, I think it can hit the senses differently when you hear it. So their couple paragraphs of open book success are as follows. The weekly huddle is about to start and the energy in the room is high. Everyone takes a second to double check the numbers they put on the boards the day prior and also check out the other lines ahead of the meeting. Notes of praise are heard as each line owner checks out what's going across the boards and sees the progress that's been made from last week. Overheard is a frontline employee asking, "Is that your lowest purchase line ever?" Questions are asked, points are clarified, appreciation is given genuinely and freely. Line owners with numbers who fell short are encouraged and supported by the attendees, and the owners who had success are recognized. Plans are made for improvement. Tasks are identified, noted by the note taker. Those who made mistakes feel like they can share them freely without fear of scrutiny, and everyone feels comfortable taking accountability for what they learned since last session. Everyone feels empowered and excited to make course corrections and share the updates next week. There are no bad ideas when brainstorming becomes the unofficial motto of these sessions, and it never fails to get the conversation started and new perspectives shared. So hopefully even in those two paragraphs, you could start or feel a sense of what it would feel like to be part of this place of work and what open book would look like and how the vision of saying this is what we want it to be. I think telling people that we want to go open book is very different than showing them visions like this that paints the picture of being an open book company. And when people can see the picture painted, I think they start to see the future very differently. So those first two steps of compelling reasons and the vision, that's how to get everyone on the same page and convince like, yes, this is a good idea, and make that decision. We're going to keep moving forward. When it feels time, yes, we're moving forward. Then we start getting into kind of the nitty gritty of it. We want to decide on the day and time that we are going to have our huddle. So huddle is a key term we use in open book management. The definition of it, it's a weekly 1-hour meeting that focuses on the scoreboard, which we'll talk about scoreboards in just a moment. But the huddle is the time set aside every week for us to come together to talk about our performance from the last week, but even more importantly, talk about what we're going to do differently going forward. We spend time sharing information lavishly. We work to come to agreement about expectations. We make key decisions when we're in this 1-hour meeting. It is not uncommon for a conversation to be happening outside of the huddle. So somebody is meeting, the day before, and we start talking about it, and someone else will say, wait, why don't we save this for the huddle? Let's bring it back where everyone gets to be a part of the conversation. And the reason we do that is because, performance is evaluated, all of that. The big bullet point on here is that the huddle is where we run the business. I think we have a lot less decisions made behind closed doors because we're bringing it to everyone. Not that everyone is a decision maker. There are still ultimately set decision makers in our business, but people get a chance to know why the decision was made as it is. They get to see the decision happen. They get to share their thoughts, share their opinions. I think people want to come to the huddle because when they don't, they're missing out on some of that key information. So it's a 1-hour meeting. It's where we make the choice to run our business from being in that huddle together. A few tips when you try to decide on the day and time that you're going to have this meeting. I will say it's very tempting to try to find that perfect day or that perfect time for everyone to be able to attend. And I just want to say, I don't think you'll ever find a perfect time. If you're open 7 days a week, the huddle's going to fall on someone's day off. People are going to have meetings get scheduled. They're going to go on vacation. There's never going to be that exact fit. You can take a poll of when it works best for the most people, and then you set, this is when we're going to huddle. Those who can't come, they can read the notes. You can rotate it. So sometimes it's on a Tuesday morning and other times it's on a Wednesday afternoon. I will just say I've seen some organizations spend a lot of time trying to get that exact right time for everyone to be able to attend. And as I said, there isn't one. So they just never set it. They never really get it going because it's just too hard to find that right day. So choose a day and time and commit to trying it. Maybe commit to trying it for 3 months and then say you'll revisit because maybe you'll find that something works a little bit better. But start with something and see how it goes. The next step is to start to determine your key measures. I mentioned the scoreboard earlier. The scoreboard is our most important financial document that we use. It has traditional sales numbers on it, but it has numbers that reflect the culture. So it could be things like employee survey scores, visitors to the website, how many accidents have been reported, things that you're not going to find in financial documents, but still tell us that the business is a success. So the definition of a key measure is that they are the most important factors to be recorded and analyzed on that scoreboard. And having really good key measures, they will reveal the relative health of the department or of the business. And the goal of the scoreboard is to be the home to all of those key measures that tell us if the business is successful or if we're falling short. The analogy we will often use is the scoreboard acts like the Jumbotron at a sporting event. If you can think of the last time you went to a sporting event or last time you turned a game on TV and you weren't there from the very beginning, but you look to that Jumbotron, you look to that big scoreboard because you can tell right away so much information about that game. I can tell you who's winning. I can tell you who's losing. I can tell you who has the ball, how much time is left. You want to be able to look at your scoreboard and tell you those big key things. So keep that Jumbotron impact in mind. The key measures on the scoreboard, they may come directly from financial documents, your profit and loss statement, your cash flow statement. Some of those things will get pulled to the scoreboard, but you also can have things that aren't on those. So like as I mentioned, number of visitors to your website, that might be a key indicator to your success because you know when people visit your website, it's going to lead to this many people actually purchasing something, but you're not going to find that in a financial document. How many employee reviews were completed? A service metric, the number of complaints or the number of compliments. Those are all hugely important to the success of our businesses, and you're not going to find them in a financial report. You're going to find them in other places or create ways to track them. All of the items that we put on our scoreboards are things that we consider to be above the line numbers. So above the line means that we can impact them. If we have no control over a certain number, we're not going to talk about it on a weekly basis. It's not worth necessarily the energy of the business when we can't impact it. An example of this would be rent. If you pay a monthly rent for your space, It doesn't matter how much you do in sales or how great your service is, your rent stays the same. So we don't need to look at that every week. But we can impact the amount we're spending on labor or the amount we're spending on this one expense. Let's talk about those things. We can impact the number of service surveys we get back by encouraging more people to fill them out. Let's put that on our scoreboard. All of this is to say that we want the scoreboard to track what is important to our success, what is important to the business. It's the financials, because you are likely going to have something like sales or revenue or amount in donations, right? All of that is important. And there's things beyond just that. So how do we define what success looks like financially and non-financially? That's what we're going to put on the scoreboard. Because it often comes up, people will have questions about what does a non-financial measure look like. Here's just a couple of examples. I won't read all of them. You can certainly read through them. This will be sent in the follow-up. But here are a few examples of what others have done. I think of a credit union consulting, the subscription revenue, or the number of renewals. People who renew year over year tells them a lot about the success. You can have one on the internal energy impact, the number of donations coming in, the percentage of products that are local, because that's something that is important to us. Social media, how many posts we have done, the number of mentions or reposts. Like I said, websites, the number of tours that we're doing, a conversion rate, right? That's just a handful that you could really choose to do. Again, not found in a financial place, but it's still a really important piece of the entire knowing if there is success or not. So thinking beyond those financials. Once we know what our key measures are, and we've shared them with people or others have shared different ideas with us, the next step of the process is to create and populate the scoreboard. So we want to put them onto this scoreboard. Some of our businesses will create a spreadsheet to use, or they'll use Google Sheets, and that is certainly okay. Many of us, I would say a good portion of our businesses, use physical scoreboards. They're put on dry erase boards, or it's kind of like that shower board, right, that you can write on and erase with an expo marker. What we like about the physical boards is that they can be displayed in meeting rooms, or they're stored somewhere and brought up for the huddle when it happens. But that way we can be looking at it on a regular basis. And I know having a physical board means there's that luxury of space. Not everyone has that. So if it is on a Google Sheet or on a spreadsheet that can be shared, I think that's an okay place to start too. The very basic structure of the scoreboard. So you can see kind of down the left side, it holds all of our key measures. We call those lines. So the lines are listed those are the things that we're going to talk about. You'll also see the line owner. That's the initials that are on there. They own the line, which we'll share more about in just a minute, but they're the person who's responsible to report out on that number every week in the huddle. You can see that this sample scoreboard, I believe it's for fiscal February. So we have 4 fiscal weeks listed, then the full month, and then the year-end numbers as well. Each line or key measure, it has a plan. The plan is set before our fiscal year starts. It doesn't change during the year. The plan remains the same. The column next to the plan, so the plan is the green where you see P. The F/A is for forecast or actual. The actual is that if the week has already passed, this was our actual number, right? We just finished last week. This was the sales number. We're going to call that an actual. If the week hasn't happened, the column holds what we call the forecast, and it's what we think the number will be, taking into consideration all the factors that might impact it. The forecast might be the same as the plan, but it might be different. The plan was set when the year started. The forecast can change as we get closer to those dates, which is why there might be difference between the plan and the forecast. This is a very simplified version of a scoreboard. We could spend hours talking about just just scoreboards in general, but hopefully this is giving you a sense of what this could look like for you. And again, adapting it, tweaking it, making it work or fit the culture that you're already working in. The next step of the process is to set the huddle roles. I think a big part of the huddle's success is making sure that people know what they're meant to be doing during the huddle. I think without clear roles and expectations, it can get real loose and real fast, real quick, and everyone's just doing their own thing or everyone's trying to facilitate. So having the roles, it helps us run the huddle more smoothly. Each of these has a much longer definition to them, but the basic definitions of each of them. First, the leader. The leader is usually the owner or the manager. They are responsible for setting the tone of the meeting. Most people will assume the leader is the one who runs the meeting. I think it's actually, we want to separate them. The leader is there to bring high energy, because if their energy is high, the huddle's energy usually will be. If their energy is low, the energy of the huddle is likely to be low. The leader's role is to ask more questions of the group to really get them thinking about the next steps rather than answer a bunch of questions. They likely know the answers, but let's get everyone starting to think like the owner, everyone thinking like the leader. So their job is to encourage a lot of those thoughts. The facilitator, they're the one who's responsible to keep the huddle on track. They keep it moving along. They follow the agenda that has been set. If the conversation gets too off track, they help bring it back around. They help keep it on time with the timekeeper a little bit as well. Line owners, this was mentioned before, but a line owner owns that key measure. They report each week at the huddle. They share what their plan was. We thought we were going to hit this number. This is what we actually believed we were going to, or what we thought we were going to get. This is what we actually get. This is why we got that number. They're then responsible for forecasting for the future. So this is what we think is going to happen the rest of the month, the rest of the year. This is what I believe or forecast the final number will be. In between huddles, the line owner acts as the champion for that line or for that measure. They mention it, they keep it front of mind, they ask for help when needed, they ask others for their help to try to hit the goals, right? They keep everyone focused on that one thing. And so everyone, all the different line owners work together to keep the focus in lots of different areas. The timekeeper, they help the facilitator keep the meeting running on time. They can hold up a time card. They can have a signal for when time is running long. It's just a way to help the facilitator make sure that we're not going too off track. The note taker takes notes on the meeting. They're not taking minutes on everything that was discussed or who said this, but they take notes on the big conversation points, the decisions. They document any tasks that people agreed to complete. They're also responsible to send the notes out after the meeting. Tie out tracker is someone who looks at the scoreboard. They make sure that things tie out, that the math adds up, that the stories behind the numbers tie out. If we hear a story about how food cost has gone up and that we're spending more on this one thing, but then you look at it and the number for food costs, that percentage hasn't increased, right? That number doesn't tie out. So that tie out tracker is someone who can poke or look for those things to call out. The accountant in an open book business, they take on a role as a coach, as a teacher. I think traditional organizations, the accountant has the numbers. They share them with who needs to know. In an open book business, the accountant teaches people where to find the numbers. They help them understand them on a much deeper level. And then the last role is other attendees. You might not be a line owner. You might not have an official role. You're not the note taker or a line owner or a facilitator, but you attend the huddles. Your responsibility is to ask questions, to answer questions, to raise your hand for different tasks that are out there, to join a subcommittee to talk about a certain thing. Your responsibility is to read the notes if you missed part of the huddle. So hopefully, as you can see, everyone has a job to play. Because remember, the great game of business, we're all playing on the same team. I don't think open book is a spectator sport. No one is sitting on the sidelines. We are all doing something actively to help the business continue to be successful. The next one on here is to set the agenda. You can see a sample agenda kind of on the screen here at the bottom. This is our standard format. How it works is it's typical that the leader and the facilitator will create the agenda together before the meeting. They'll set it ahead of time. And usually once it's set, we're not changing it a whole lot. At ZingTrain, we use the same agenda every single week. So the leader and the facilitator aren't having conversations weekly to recreate it. We're going to use the same agenda. Where the flexibility does come in is usually in our hot topics agenda section. So this is where we need to bring the pressing things, or as different things come up, we want to bring this to the huddle to talk about. So you can see there's usually a good amount of time, and this can flex if there's a lot of hot topics. We'll spend more time talking there than maybe looking at our scoreboard. Stressing just the importance of an agenda. I don't know about you, but I've been to meetings before that didn't have a lot of structure, and we all showed up and no one really knew who was doing what or what we were meant to talk about. And it oftentimes could lead to a lot of side conversations, going down rabbit holes, not accomplishing what actually needed to get done. And I think it takes just a couple of those meetings and people want to stop coming to them. So having the agenda, I think it helps make everyone feel good about the plan for the meeting. You set the agenda, you share it in advance, people know what to expect of what we're going to talk about. And I think that makes people want to attend the huddle. There's questions on agendas, again, something we could talk lots and lots about. Please let us know. So now it might feel a little scary, but it's time to have the first huddle. I think all of the planning work that has been done brings us to this point to host our first one. The first time you have your huddle, our advice is to plan for it to go longer than you think it will. We think of a huddle as a 1-hour meeting that's focused on the scoreboard. I don't think it's uncommon for businesses, their first time to do it, it might be an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. And I think that's because it takes time for people to get comfortable sharing. They need to get used to what it means to report out on a number. And people might ask more questions about the process and about the content in those early days. Or some people will just talk way too much or more than needed. It's a learning curve. I mean, and it's a learning curve for everyone, whether you have an official role, whether you are one of those other attendees. Let's just be okay with that early on, that we need to get good at this. The more we practice, the better we're going to get as we go through it. So plan for it to go longer than scheduled. After you hold your first huddle as well, the note taker's responsibility is to send out those huddle notes to the team and to anyone else who might find the notes interesting. So I mentioned Zingerman's, we're a community of 11 different businesses. I didn't do the actual math, but I think there might be around 30 or so huddles that happen on a weekly or monthly basis at Zingerman's, because we have our the business-wide huddle, but then there's different departmental huddles. So we will send our huddle notes to everyone, because even though I don't work at the catering department at the deli, when I can read what is happening in that department or what is upcoming, I can see how I can help, or maybe something that they're doing might impact me or one of my clients or one of my customers when we're planning a catering event together. So we share the information out with as many people. You're not required to read it, but I think it's very interesting to see the different connections that can come up when we do read all of those huddle notes. And then after you hold that first huddle, we are big fans of feedback and opening feedback up to lots of people. So we will do what we call a liked best next time after that huddle. So whether that's immediately after, it could be in another meeting, you could even do it over email. It's asking people, what did you like best about how the huddle went? And then what could be done differently? What could we do differently at the next one? We take all of that feedback. We can keep doing the things that are working well for us. We can make any adjustments that we might need to. And I think being open to the feedback is a great way to get early buy-in. People, I think, are more willing to jump in and maybe not, I mean, still have a little bit of caution, but it's, I'm going to get on board with this because I know there's going to be opportunities to make those adjustments throughout this process. And then the last step that we have listed is to please call ZingTrain to celebrate. You just had your first huddle and we want to celebrate with you. And even if you didn't actually call us, that's of course fine. The important thing is for you to celebrate the work that went into doing this. I think it's a huge shift to go to being an open book organization. So don't skip over recognizing all of that hard work. If you do call us, we will be your biggest cheerleaders. We would love to keep encouraging you to move forward in this process. We will always be here as a resource while you continue the journey. We think of ourselves as continuing the journey, so we could learn together. But we would certainly love to celebrate, and maybe even send you a coffee cake to celebrate or something as well. So call us, please. Okay, that was just a lot of information, and I know that. You are going to get this recording so that way you can refer back to it as needed. But in the time that we do have left, I do want to turn it back to Katie, who's going to share some of the questions that you all may have been asking throughout. So I think with that, I'll stop sharing my slides, Katie, and turn it back to you.
Thank you. Yes, so much information, but also to the point of you starting talking about visioning, it really did feel like you were sort of leading us through a vision of
Oh,
what
good.
it looks like, which I found to be a really nice thing to follow. So we do have a couple of questions. First up is, how do you recommend training and leading people to be a tie-out tracker, one of those huddle roles, as it could be challenging to hold others accountable for their line and the numbers?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think that there are times, especially in smaller organizations, that the tie-out tracker might also be the leader for a while. So the leader takes on that role, somebody who maybe is a little more comfortable holding people accountable already, who can kind of point out when those things are happening. And then when it becomes appropriate, someone else might take that role. I also think we give very clear expectations. So this is what it means to be a tie-out tracker, that you come in before the huddle and you look at all of the numbers. You do the math. During the huddle, you listen very closely to the stories and then call it out. We encourage them to. We also share with everyone who's going to be at the huddle. Don't be surprised if the tie-out tracker or if anyone asks a question if it doesn't make sense. I think we model it. So if I'm the leader and a line owner, which can happen, and somebody, whether it's the tie-out tracker or someone else, they maybe poke a hole in what I'm saying, how I respond to that models what other people are going to do as well. So if I can very graciously say, oh, you're right, I hadn't thought about that. Or, ooh, yeah, maybe my math isn't mathin' today. Thank you so much for letting me know. I think it illustrates to others this is how they could respond, and that makes it easier for the tie-out tracker. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, next up. Susan's wondering if we have an example of huddle notes that we might be able to share.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, we can send one in the follow-up, I think. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if there's one to pop into the chat right now, but I think we're happy to share example huddle notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next up. We have a very small team, 10 to 12 people. This is a question from Monica. Monica, our team's about that size too.
We have 13.
And more details about the team. Their accountant is outsourced and not in the daily organization. And they don't have managers other than the owner. They have team leaders.
Yeah.
So could you address possible pivots for these circumstances?
Yeah. Well, two of Zingerman's businesses also have outside accountants. They pay an accounting firm. Those accountants are invited to come to the weekly meetings when they can. They don't always, but they also know that more than just one person from the company might be reaching out to them with numbers, and they've embraced that, which is very nice. The other part of the question, I was like, ooh, two-part question, was around small teams when it's
Oh,
mostly,
small teams when there's not really there's an owner, but there's not necessarily managers. So I think the hierarchy of that.
I
Monica,
mean,
if you have any more details, you can put it in the chat.
yeah, and I would just say, I think that's totally okay. The leader would probably be your owner or your manager. The facilitator doesn't need to be a manager. I think frontline facilitators are sometimes even better. I mean, what a way to practice being in a leadership role without being in a formal leadership position. So anyone can be the facilitator, and the more they train, the better they'll get at it. And again, line owners don't need to be a manager. I think of the Roadhouse, they certainly have managers, but the people who own the average check line, so the average amount people spend at dinner or lunch or breakfast, that's owned by a frontline server because they're the ones who can actually impact it. The managers aren't out there actively selling. So I think when the frontline employees take more of an active role in the huddle, that's a really good thing. So hopefully that answers that too.
Yeah. And then also, Monica, you may have seen in the chat, Becky has offered to share some of the adjustments that her open book management business is and has done. So we can connect you two after this webinar.
Awesome.
Okay, next question. Heather asks, do I remember correctly that the only information that is not open book are the wages and salaries? Could you talk a little bit about that piece?
That is pretty much true. Again, we do have one business in our organization that does share wages and salaries and will, like, they do transparent wages. The other 10 businesses do not. I will say that most of us, we will track labor as one of the lines on the scoreboard, especially our restaurants or people who have a lot of frontline labor, but it's all lumped into one thing. So you're going to see labor as a percentage. So we spent 25% in labor this past week, or maybe that's divided amongst front of the house and back of the house. So 12% from the front and 13% from the back. But we are not putting the direct labor dollars or saying this is what everybody makes on the scoreboards. So you are correct. That is pretty much the one thing that 90% of our businesses does not share is wages. I do think though, if you really looked and dove into it, you could probably figure out some form or fashion of wage. Like, well, you'll see it in a lump sum. Here's what we spent on labor this week. We hire, we have 10 people who work here. I know what I make. And like, people don't do that though, but I think they could. I don't think people do.
Right. I also think enough of the other financials are available that you would be able to like estimate if it felt like something about the wages and salaries was very off, compared to all the other numbers that you are documented and sharing.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Bobby's asking, what about compensation for these meetings? They have a blend of salaried and hourly employees. And at Zingerman's, do people clock in if they are hourly and get paid? And are salaried employees expected to attend?
Good question. Hourly employees do get paid. If we are asking people to come in for this meeting, especially if it's outside of working hours, they will absolutely clock in, whether that is a training wage or a meeting wage or just the regular wage, that can be determined, but we will certainly pay them. If you are salary, it is usually an expectation that you're going to attend it, but you, of course, like any person, like things can come up. You can just talk to somebody and say, I'm not going to be at the huddle this week. Could you be my proxy? And a proxy means that someone else is going to come in and report out on your number or report back to you if there were any questions. What comes to mind to me is when working at the Roadhouse, again, open 7 days a week. Our huddles used to be Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Well, there's one manager whose shift is Wednesday from 3 p.m. to midnight. So is it, coming in at 10 o'clock? Oftentimes, yes, they would still come in. We would try to rotate that so it wasn't your shift every single week. Or again, if something had come up, we'll say in advance, I'm not going to be there for the huddle. Here's my information. ZingTrain, our huddle is during the week. We tend to be more of a Monday through Friday organization. We meet Wednesdays at 1. It's an expectation that we all come to the huddle if we're in the building or if we're not in training. We try not to, I wouldn't schedule our webinar for Wednesday at 1 because it's when we're going to huddle. But of course, things come up or meetings happen. We step out if we need to. I will say too, when we do need to miss the huddle, I don't know if Katie or Jenny would agree with this. I'm bummed when I miss our huddle. There's really good information that we talk about. It is truly where we run the business. So I want to be there. I make it a priority of my week to be at the huddle because I know we're talking about really important things and I want my voice in the room. And I think the better the huddles are, the more people start to have that mindset.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think when I am unable to attend a huddle, I always ask many employees questions about the meeting notes because there is so much, there's so much that gets discussed and you learn new things every week. So
yep, agreed.
Yeah, so this actually ties in nicely to the next question. Is how does this process tie into performance evaluations and/or management?
How does it tie into performance evaluations? I feel like there's a couple ways to maybe answer the question. Like one, it is an expectation for many people, especially managers, that they attend the huddle. So if you are consciously missing it, or again at ZingTrain, if I just sat at my desk during the huddle and didn't come out, I think that would get brought up in a performance evaluation of you are not participating in this. If you are a line owner, which has very clear expectations to it, and you're not meeting those expectations, I think that would also come up in a performance evaluation or in a performance review. It's the what help do you need? Or let's talk about how we could be a more effective line owner. I also think, and I don't know if this was part of the question, if I own the sales line and sales have been soft, I'm not being evaluated necessarily on sales not hitting where they need to go. There's not that direct relation to performance management because even though I'm the line owner, I'm not the only one responsible for trying to increase our sales. I'm the champion for it. I'm encouraging other people to keep it front of mind. So the numbers on the board, I don't think very closely always tie to performance evaluation, or they don't need to. If that kind of makes sense. I mean, I'm thinking other examples too of if you're the head chef and food cost is high, yeah, that might come up in a performance evaluation because we need to get food costs back under control. We need to have some more conversations. So I think there can be a connection, but it's not always a direct link to it.
Yeah. Okay, so this will be our last question because we are almost at a full hour. Thank you all. These are such great things for everyone to think through and get some additional information from Joanie about. So Kylie says that they have a team that's very engaged, and the point about not everyone being a decision maker in the meeting really resonated.
Okay.
Have you found that there are times when the team gets stuck during a discussion? For example, I imagine some people can hold strong views about certain conversations.
Yeah. Yes, we can get stuck. It certainly happens. I think what helps us is we do have a very clearly defined decision maker. Katie Frank is our managing partner at ZingTrain. Each of the other businesses all have managing partners as well. They are ultimately the final decision makers. So if we are feeling like we are just or we're stuck, nobody is making a decision, or there's just lots of talk in circles, I think that is when the leader can say, okay, I've heard all of your information. I'm going to make this decision. Or there are times where we have an idea that Katie will say, we have the next 10 minutes to talk about this. If we can reach consensus, if we can all come to agreement in 10 minutes, great, that is our decision. If we can't, then I'm going to make a consultative decision, meaning I'm going to take all this feedback and all this input, then I'm going to make the decision myself. And knowing that that can happen, I think is helpful. Sometimes people need to be reminded that we're not all decision makers, but we're there to put our voice in the room, but there's still ultimately someone else who's going to make that final call.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan, I did see your question about sort of financial literacy of staff. And so I will make sure that we include some information in the follow-up email about that. So I just want to say thank you everyone for being here, for taking the time to learn and consider possibly implementing open book in your organization. Joanie, thank you for sharing the framework, the language of working in an open book business. And I hope it's been a really valuable resource, really to illustrate something that's possibly new and unknown to a lot of people here. Jenny, also, thank you very much for rocking out the chat. As you see, if you are tight on time, we love hearing what people thought. And so if you would like to rate your experience, 0 is very awful and 10 is highly recommend. And then if you have a bit more time, we do have a quick survey that Jenny will also drop. It's a link. And if you have feedback that you want to write out or you have suggestions for future webinars, we would love to hear them. And then lastly, as we've said a few times, we will send out a recording of today's webinar along with some additional resources. So please look out for that in your inbox. And that's it. Awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.